Hi, I'm Josh Knobe from Yale Cognitive Science.
Hi, I'm George Newman from the Organizational Behavior area at the Yale School of Management.
Hey, and George, I feel like one of the really exciting things that's coming out of a lot of your recent experimental work is these insights into the idea that people don't want to possess objects just for their usefulness or even for any kind of actual quality that these objects might have, but rather for a kind of aura or essence or kind of authenticity they might possess.
Yeah, so I've been interested in this topic of how people think about value and why they make certain types of purchases, and especially interested in domains in which the purchase behavior seems kind of a little bit odd. Why is it that people want an original artwork over a perfect duplicate, especially, if the appearance is exactly the same? Or you could think about something like JFK's golf clubs, which sold for $750,000. Why is it that people are willing to pay that much for those types of objects?
So then what's the answer? Why would someone spend $750,000 to own JFK's golf clubs?
Well, it's not because they're, going to be super awesome on the course or something like that. So we've done some experiments, and it part of the reason, at least, seems to be this idea that people believe that JFK's golf clubs contain some of his kind of magical essence, that some piece of JFK was transferred to these items, and that's really what's making them valuable.
Oh wait, so how did you test for this? What did you guys actually do?
In some lab studies, in some cases we told people just to imagine an object. We said, imagine a sweater that belonged to your favorite celebrity, and people would say, George Clooney or Celine Dion or whoever. And then we would say, now imagine that that sweater was kind of sterilized such that any physical residue from the person was completely removed. And what we found is that, when you ask just initially, how much would you want to pay for something like your favorite celebrity sweater, that amount drops dramatically if people learn that it's been sterilized.
That's awesome. So it's not somehow just this sense that it was possessed by the person, that it's Celine Dion's object. It's that somehow there's almost something physically on it, and then if you run it through the washing machine or something, the thing that's physically on it is going to be lost.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting is we also ask about these negative celebrities, so Saddam Hussein or Bernie Madoff, and there's actually a market for those types of objects, and people say they're willing to pay a non-zero sum to own them, and they're sterilizing them actually tends to increase value. So you kind of find the opposite effect, where taking off some of their cooties actually makes them more valuable to people.
Oh, so with Saddam Hussein's objects, then, you're saying you don't want to own Saddam Hussein's stuff because his magical essence is oozing over them. You want to own them for some completely different reason. But then, what is the reason?
So for the negative celebrities, it seems to be much more driven by kind of perceptions of what we think of as market value. So this idea that others might be willing to pay more for it at a future point in time, or that maybe just your friends will think it's really cool that you own something like that. But if anything, the kind of contamination or the essence seems to be negative in those cases.
But the market value explanation seems a little circular. If you said the reason these people want to own it is because of its market value, well, that's just because certain other people would pay for it. So then you just have to explain why those other people would want to own it.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and it's something that we struggle with a lot. I mean, obviously, it is circular. It's the justification that people tend to give, and not only that, we find some evidence for it experimentally. So if we propose a very different kinds of transformation, so we say, imagine you could buy this item, let's say it was Saddam Hussein's sweater, and now one caveat is that you can never sell it again. And in fact, you can't even tell anybody else that you own it. Well, then suddenly valuation seems to drop really dramatically.
Oh, but for the positive celebrities, people want it even if they can never tell anyone.
That's right, yeah.
But something that I find really striking about this kind of interest people have is that it's always an interest in owning things that are, something that were possessed, say, by a celebrity, by a famous person. Like if I consider, say, Marilyn Monroe versus some philosopher that I really like say Sean Nichols. I think Sean Nichols is a truly great philosopher, and definitely a much greater philosopher than Marilyn Monroe was an actress.
Right.
But if you ask me, would I rather own like an object that had been touched by Sean Nichols or by Marilyn Monroe? For some reason, I would have no attraction at all toward owning an object that was touched by this truly great philosopher who is not nearly as famous as Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah. So we find that fame seems to have a big role. So we just asked people in another set of conditions to just imagine people that they really liked or people they disliked, maybe for it could be a colleague in your field or a friend or a family member. So there we don't find the same types of effects. So really the boost has to do with some notion of celebrity. And I think it's kind of an interesting puzzle that we're still trying to think about. Like clearly contagion, or what we're thinking about as contagion, seems to matter. Even for a relative, so you want to hang on to maybe a sentimental possession like your grandmother's possessions, or maybe even some items from your childhood, and you wouldn't want to replace them with an identical duplicate. But that mechanism seems to be a little bit different. One way to think about it is that whereas you might want those items for contagion, you wouldn't necessarily put a dollar amount on them.
Oh, so whatever it is that makes me want to hold on to like my grandmother's old necklace, it's something really different from what would make me want to have JFK's golf clubs.
Well, or there's at least something about being a celebrity that seems to enhance this effect, right? Or at least enhance it enough that people are willing to kind of pay so much at auction for these items.
It is interesting that these people they tend to be people associated with a certain kind of glamour. Say like JFK. It's not that I can't imagine someone wanting to own an object from a person just because he was such a nice guy.
Right. Yeah, so Paul Rozin has really, in kind of modern day psychology, is really the pioneer in looking at a lot of these types of contagion effects. And in some of their stuff, they do a really nice job of kind of distinguishing between notions of contagion, like your ideas about how Marilyn Monroe's essence got onto the item. And then there could also be this kind of second order contagion effect, which is now that I have this item, what happens to me when I touch it?
That you become a little bit more Marilyn Monroe-like or something.
Right, a little bit more glamorous. Yeah. And there's actually just a recent paper in PLOS One which shows a very similar kind of idea. So they show this with putting ability, and if people believe that they're using a famous golfer's putter, they're actually more accurate.
As long as no one sterilizes them.
Yeah, as long as nobody sterilizes it, yeah, totally.
Wait, but then there's something puzzling to me about that, because if what you wanted to do was to sort of take on the qualities of this person, then it seems like you'd always want to find a same-gender glamorous person. So, women would want Marilyn Monroe's objects and men would want George Clooney's objects.
Yeah.
But is that what's observed? I mean, it doesn't seem like I don't want to become more like Marilyn Monroe or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't have any data on that. I mean, we have looked for these same types of effects in the field. So, we actually do look at the JFK auction and the Bernie Madoff auction and find a very similar pattern. So if you, we had coders go through and code all the items in terms of how much contact they thought somebody would have with the item. And so for these positive individuals like JFK or Marilyn Monroe, perceptions of contact seem to dramatically increase how much these items sell for at auction.
Wait, so it's like of all of Marilyn Monroe's items or whatever, all of JFK's items, it's the ones that he was most physically touching are worth the most, and then the ones he was the least physically touching are worth the least?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we can actually look at that controlling for like the estimated value of the item. So if you take two things that are worth about the same amount, like a wall decoration versus a shirt or something like that. In the case of JFK, the shirt sells for much more than it was estimated to be worth, whereas the wall hanging doesn't really sell for much more. And it's the opposite for Bernie Madoff. So, whereas his items still sold at auction, people really don't want things like his bed sheets or his shirt.
You don't want to be sleeping in Bernie Madoff sheets. What you want is like Bernie Madoff's paintings or something on your wall.
Right, yeah.
But then the reason you want that is so that other people know you have Bernie Madoff's paintings on the wall. If you just had them, but no one knew, it wouldn't be any fun or something.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so it's something about this idea that other people are going to know, or that they're going to be more valuable in the future.
But I was thinking one thing, as you start talking about this, that seems to come to mind is this idea that when people create things, then there's a real difference in whether they're creating is actually something that they're physically touching in this way. So, if I download an MP3 from some amazing band, it's not as though the band has kind of physically touched the MP3 or something. But if you get a great sculpture or something, then you think that the sculptor was actually touching this thing that you're looking at. So does the physical contact of an artist with the thing they're creating end up affecting the degree to which people think of that thing as being valuable?
Yeah, so there definitely does seem to be some kind of domain effect. So, we find a similar thing in the domain of artwork. Like people seem to value an original Picasso, or even from an unknown artist, an original artwork, because they believe that, again, some of the artist's kind of essence was transferred to the object. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, for MP3s, you don't see that effect. People have no problem downloading MP3s, and it's kind of even unclear what an original would be in that context. So, I think part of it has to do with our ideas just about how different things come into being, and items that are really physical in nature and that were created through a physical process. We seem to think of in these kind of contagion terms, and for something like a song that has no physical component, then we don't really think about it that way.
But it's funny, I get a really different intuition when it comes to artworks. So suppose that there's a great artist who's also just a truly terrible human being. So then you might think that there would be the sense that I wouldn't want to own something that this artist actually touched. But in that case, I still get the same intuition that I want the artist's actual sculpture, not just an exact duplicate of that artist's sculpture.
Right.
I don't at all feel that because this person is a terrible human being, I would prefer to have the exact duplicate that he never touched, rather than having the sculpture that he actually himself made.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's an interesting point. It kind of relates to the, getting back to the Bernie Madoff or the Saddam Hussein thing. If you really take it at face value, what seems to be going on is that people are saying, well, I want the original thing. I wouldn't want like a knockoff Bernie Madoff item. Or if I found out that Bernie Madoff didn't really own this item in any way, suddenly it's just going to be worthless. But at the same time, any kind of physical contagion or kind of cooties seem to be negative. So yeah, you can imagine a really similar thing with artwork.
Oh, maybe of all artworks made by terrible people, I would especially like the ones that were least kind of physically touched by those people. Like even if you consider a painting versus a sculpture.
Yeah.
But in the painting, the person's is only touching a paintbrush, which in turn touches the painting. It's not as though the terrible human being is actually touching this painting.
Right. So if they were like a conceptual artist, then
that would be
the best. Yeah.
Right. But I guess there are some cases in which an artist isn't really physically touching the work at all. I guess according to this theory, you might think then that will have there would be the least sense of them having an aura that's kind of rubbing off on them.
Yeah. Well, artwork seems to be a little bit more complicated. So, one way to think about a lot of these types of effects is like there's some kind of transfer of the person. You're thinking about some small piece of the person being in this object. And artwork, for like these celebrity possessions, that's this really physical thing. But artwork, has both this kind of physical component, but it also has this intentional component. So, we care a lot about what the artist was thinking or feeling when they made the artwork, and we especially care about kind of the originality of the idea. So if we find out that they just copied it from somebody else, it's suddenly going to be a lot less valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So
is your thought then that whatever it is that makes us value JFK's golf clubs as opposed to some other golf clubs that are just exactly, say, molecule for molecule identical, whatever that is, it's something completely different from what would make us value an original Picasso painting versus a duplicate that was, say, exactly identical in every way to the Picasso painting?
Well, I don't know if they're completely different processes. You could kind of think about them as, if you're talking about celebrity objects, you're sensitive to kind of this idea that a piece of the person has been transferred to the object, and that's really only taking this really physical form. But in artwork, it could take a physical form, so it could be a really analogous process of like contagion, that I really care if Picasso made contact with it, or maybe if the artist is really terrible, I'm going to care about that too, in a negative way. But then you also kind of care about this mental component. You care about the artist's intentions or their knowledge at the point of creating the artwork.
But I was thinking, if you think it's just about the artist's intention or the originality or something, that seems to leave out something which is some really important aspect of it, which is, so we value truly great works of art by great artists, but oddly enough, it seems like people also value completely mediocre works of art by great artists.
Yeah.
Even a really mediocre thing by a truly great artist, people will attribute a real value to it. And it seems like that value can't involve something like the intentions or originality or thought in this work. It has to involve something like the intentions or originality or the nature of just the artist herself, just who she is.
Yeah. Or it could involve this kind of contagion component as well, that there's some value, especially if the person's really well known, even if the artwork's kind of crappy, it still has made contact with this person.
That's a really good point. So if you consider bad works by great artists, I feel like people only value bad works by great famous artists.
Right.
See, there's a truly great artist that no one has ever heard of. I would only value her good work. I wouldn't value the bad work just because it was made by her. But I would value the bad work of great artists who are really famous.
Right. Yeah. The artwork is just really interesting because, whereas you're not going to value the bad work by an unknown artist, we still seem to assign a really high value for artwork in general. Like, if you walk into any gallery, there might be a lot of artists that you've never heard of, and maybe that aren't even well known in the art market, and yet the paintings, sell for $30,000 or $60,000 or $90,000, which compared to a lot of other objects, right, is a ton of money.
Right, and do you think it's because of this idea that your essence or something is so much more rubbing off on the work of art than your essence could rub off on some other object?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to completely discount, factors like just that there is an existing market for it, and you could think about things like Dutch tulip mania, where people were valuing these tulip bulbs. So you could have these kind of like artificial markets that spring up, but I think probably for art, it's a combination of both. There's a lot of interest in artwork, but beyond that, I think we have this intuitive notion that artworks are containing, as you said, like some essence of the person, and that's valuable to us in some way, or at least we have.
I totally get that. So suppose that you created a scientific paper and like an abstract expressionist painting. There would be so much more of a sense that your intrinsic Georgiosity was present in the abstract expressionist painting, not in the scientific paper.
No, I'm definitely doing the wrong thing.
You have to switch jobs.
Yeah, I gotta switch.
I was thinking, so far we've been talking about this really high art kind of stuff. But, I mean, do you think that the same thing could be going on? I mean, when just people want to buy certain brands or something? I mean, obviously, there's not a sense that the brand is a human being who can touch something and have their essence rub off on it.
Yeah, so we've looked at that too, really more for like luxury brands. So kind of just intuitively that seemed to me at least, to be kind of like similar to this idea of back to JFK's golf clubs. It's not that you want to take them out on the green and use them. It's that they have this other kind of additional meaning. And so if you think about like a really expensive, like a Louis Vuitton purse or something like that, it's not just that it holds objects really well. It seems to have this kind of additional component. Now, they're like artwork, obviously a competing source of value is going to be something like market value. Like you want to show off to other people that you can afford this item, but at the same time, you could kind of ask the question, well, people don't engage in kind of needless displays of wealth. Like they'll go out to the street and just burn a bunch of money.
But that thing that you're just saying, it seems like there would be another possible explanation of that thing that you were just saying. It could be that what's going on is what people want to do is to just display their wealth. But at the same time, there's this norm that you're not supposed to display your wealth. So what you want to do is find a way of displaying your wealth that isn't just obviously an attempt to display your wealth.
Right.
So if you just, one way to display your wealth would just be to like, you walk into someone's room and there's just like cash just lying on the floor. But then there's just a norm that you're not allowed to do that. So people who want to show you how wealthy they are, they have to do it in some tricky other way. And one way is maybe by buying luxury brands. Yeah.
I mean, certainly that is part of it. Kind of coming at this from the vantage of contagion and this other work that we were talking about. One thing that my co-authors and I were interested in is, maybe there's this effect though of just being kind of from the brand's original place. Levi's is from San Francisco, or we were talking about Louis Vuitton. They're from Paris, and so do consumers assign a higher value to these items that come from the original factory than identical products that are made elsewhere? And the answer actually turns out to be yes. So people want the Louis Vuitton bag that's made in Paris more so than the one that's made in California.
Wait, so it's like the exact same company making the exact same product, and just what you care about is what the location of the factory is.
Right.
But it varies for each brand. It's not like there's something better about being from Paris. It's like the Parisian brand, it has to be from the factory in Paris, but the San Francisco brand, it has to be made in the factory in San Francisco.
Yeah. And we do our best to try to look at kind of what could be competing explanations, like maybe you just think it's higher quality, or the people in Paris really know what they're doing, or something like that. But what's kind of neat is, and I should have said this before, with the celebrity objects papers too, so we can look at this idea of kind of contagion sensitivity. So Paul Rosen and his colleagues developed these great items, which are things like, I wouldn't eat soup if it had been stirred with used but thoroughly washed fly swatter. Or I wouldn't sleep in a hotel room if I knew that somebody had died in there before. And so people really vary in how much they're sensitive to contagion. And so that factor actually then really seems to matter a great deal, both when you're talking about, purchasing JFK's stuff, but also for these luxury goods. So it's these people that are higher in sensitivity to contagion that really insist, hey, I want the item from the original factory. And people who are less sensitive to contagion say, I don't really care. They're probably going to be exactly the same.
Oh wait, so that almost seems to predict if you think it's kind of like the reverse of the fly swatter or something, then you'd almost predict that just some arbitrary other thing, you would value it more if it was made in that exact factory. Like say you really value these clothes from Louis Vuitton or something, and then someone made like math textbooks in that factory.
Right.
You'd prefer to buy those math textbooks because they would have some of the Louis Vuitton-ness had rubbed off on your math textbook or something.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, that's interesting, right? Like if it just passes through the factory, it's going to be more valuable. Yeah, but I mean, that's it. I mean, kind of getting back to what we were talking about before, it seems to be like in line with the same idea. You want the celebrity stuff. You don't, even if it's somebody you like, but they're not a celebrity, you don't necessarily want their stuff. And the same with these luxury goods. So it's some sort of kind of like, positive aura, positive essence about this person that, is in part going to be an association with high status or celebrity, but then it also seems to have this really like physical component because people are sensitive to, did it actually come into contact with it, and you can actually rub it off through like a sterilization process.
But the things that we're talking about again with these products, they're products that have a kind of glamour to them. Like suppose that you think that Intel is just really, really great at making computer chips. Then would you more want to own like a computer chip that was made in the original Intel factory?
Yeah. So we haven't asked obviously directly about that, but I think the answer is no. And so in some other work, I've kind of looked at these trade-offs between what you could think of as kind of like functional utility or more or less kind of functional utility, right? Like, is it going to be a computer chip, or is it going to have relatively a little functional value, like an artwork? And so where an item falls along that dimension seems to predict a whole bunch about how much people are going to value authenticity, how much they care about where it was really made, how much they're envisioning, these ideas about essence and essence transfer.
Oh, so there's some notion of authenticity that people really care about, and they care about authenticity, say, in their clothes, but not in their computers.
Right. And kind of the higher that something is in a functional value, like a light bulb or a hammer or something like that, the less that people are kind of concerned about these types of issues.
Oh, so the more useless something is, the greater this aura can be around it or something.
I think that's the general idea. And I mean, a secondary issue is when you talk about valuing things for reasons other than utility, it becomes really hard to put a price tag on it. So, we were talking about artwork before, I think, and kind of just the astronomical prices even for artists that you've never heard of. Part of that is, well, that you're valuing some piece of the person's essence, but then you don't really know how to put a price on that, right? So you don't know if you're getting a good deal or not. Whereas for functional utility, it's a kind of an easier thing to assess.
Oh, so say an artist created a work of art, and then the artist added something to that work of art that made it actually be useful. That would dramatically decrease its value.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting prediction. I can't think of any cases where that's happened. I mean, there's a lot of the reverse of what's sometimes referred to as like an artist baptizing an object. So like Duchamp was famous for the ready-mades and
like in advance of broken art.
Yeah. But I don't know of like the reverse where somebody's taken like a priceless work of art and then made a chair out of it or something.
Or I just meant something like they'd say on a college campus or something, there could be a sculpture that also helped to provide shade for an area or something.
Yeah. I mean,
but then suddenly it wouldn't seem like
so valuable. Yeah, I mean, it might be the case. Like, especially you can imagine, kind of, in a scenario study or something like that, telling people that you really highlight all of its functional uses, and maybe that makes people value it a little bit less.
So why do you think that there's this canon in these special cases about this notion of authenticity? I mean, it seems like it's something that goes beyond what we were talking about before, these ideas and originality and so forth. Because this notion of authenticity that you're talking about now, it seems to depend not just on these kind of things, but on which factory it was made in.
Yeah, so, I mean, authenticity is this really, to me at least, is a really interesting concept, right? I mean, it's super hard to define what it is. You could say, well, authenticity is it being true or legitimate or something like that. But, those are just kind of restating the problem. So one way to tackle it is to think about authenticity as a lot of different kinds of things. So we're attending to different types of features or rules. And you could talk about this more kind of physical notion of authenticity, which could be like a notion of kind of spatiotemporal connectedness. But you could also have other kinds of authenticity based around, for instance, the person's intentions, or maybe a commitment to a particular set of values, or if a company said they were committed to the environment and then they did something that was clearly not in line with that, we might say they were inauthentic, but maybe for moral reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I've thought about a lot of that stuff in my own work is to kind of group it under the central heading of essentialism. So this idea that in general, we tend to think of the world in terms of essences, and that when we're tracking something like authenticity, what we're really trying to discern is, to what extent is it true to the essence that I might care about? So, which could be kind of a more value-driven thing, or it could be a very physical thing.
So when you get some Louis Vuitton product or something, it's not that you want a good product. You want something that has Louis Vuitton's essence within it.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, right? Which for these more physical domains might be a very kind of physical notion of essence, but there could also be other different ways of kind of realizing that essential characteristic. But yeah, the basic notion is like what we mean when we talk about authenticity is is to think about the item's essential characteristics.
Oh, and then you can explain both of these phenomena in that way, that for that reason you want something that was, say, physically touched by a person, but at the same time you want something that, most truly embodies that person's values. So something could be inauthentic to Picasso, either because Picasso never actually touched it, it was a duplicate of one of his paintings created by someone else. Or it could be inauthentic to Picasso because even though Picasso made it, it was just some hack job he made in order to get a few extra dollars.
Right, right. To settle his bar tab.
What? Yeah, exactly. And then in that way, it doesn't embody, what is most essential to him or something.
Right, yeah. That's the idea, yeah.
So then, I feel like one thing that I find really puzzling about these kind of results that you get, I don't know if you like to think about these things kind of from an evolutionary perspective, but you can see why we would have evolved to try to avoid the contagion of bad things. Because there are certain bad things that really are contagious. They can really make us sick. But there's no symmetric effect for good things. It's not, if I'm talking with someone who has an illness, their illness can actually rub off on me and make me sick. But if I'm speaking with someone who's especially healthy and spending time with that person, the person touches me and so forth, it's not as though their healthiness can actually infect me and make me healthier.
Right.
So it seemed, at least initially, it seems really puzzling that people don't only have this effect for bad things. Why do you want something that was touched by a good person as opposed to just not wanting something that was touched by a bad person?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I think there's a few different possibilities. So one is just that it's epiphenomenal, right? So it pays to track negative disease contaminants, and this is just an outgrowth of that same process. So that might be one possibility. A second possibility is that maybe this is just kind of a feature of the mind, so that when we think about lots of different things, especially kind of these more abstract qualities, we might still tend to instantiate them in like a really physical way. So, it's hard to conceive of what George Clooney's essence even is. We know that we like George Clooney. We know that he has these positive characteristics, and then we might kind of think about that positivity or his essence as a very physical kind of thing that can then be transferred. So that might be another possibility. And a third possibility is, all of these effects tend to converge around these ideas of notion of like status and celebrity and that kind of thing. And so, and maybe you could even think about artwork as a certain kind of like fitness display. Like it's really hard to make a work of art. And so there's something kind of about fitness there. But, another idea I've been playing around with is just that whereas you can't contract something like health, a lot of times when we think about status, there is a very kind of contagious element. Like if you want to know who's popular, it might be a lot of the same people that are hanging around with the popular person, right? And so physical proximity can actually provide a pretty good cue to a lot of these status things. So it might be the case that, we're really sensitive to this positive contagion because of reasons that are specific to status or something like that.
Oh, yeah. So, you looked earlier at the correlation between caring about contagion, like caring that you're going to get sick from a fly swatter or something, and showing these kinds of effects. But do you think you would get the same kind of correlation if you looked at, caring about status and caring about hanging out with high-status people and so forth, and these kind of effects?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one prediction that it makes. I'm skeptical that would bear out. But maybe it's worth seeing. I mean, the contagion effects that we see seem to be pretty specific. So things like religious belief or superstitious reasoning don't really seem to predict any of these contagion effects. So it's really about contagion per se. And as you pointed out, right, that it could be a sensitivity to kind of a negative contagion, and that's still predicting this positive valuation or valuation of these like positive items. So that would tend to favor this idea, either that it's epiphenomenal in some way, or that it's something about the concepts, and probably not the status idea. But
I was thinking one thing that would tend to favor the idea that it's not the status idea is if you found that really, really high status people show the same effect. Like Kurt Cobain was trying to buy Leadbelly's guitar. It's probably not because Kurt Cobain, felt like he didn't have enough status and wanted the status of Leadbelly to be like rubbing off on him.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I imagine, there aren't too many people that can afford like $750,000 golf clubs. So maybe a good chunk of them are celebrities themselves. Yeah.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at. That the people who are doing these kinds of things are precisely the people who would least need anyone else's like status to be rubbing off on them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a really good point.
So, just in conclusion, I just wanted to hear, do you have any new ideas about where to take this stuff in the future? Like, or do you have some new thoughts about what to be doing with this kind of work?
Looking at the actual auction data is actually a pretty recent thing, and so I think it's exciting to find validation for some of these ideas in the field. And so I think that's one thing that I'm interested in looking at. But then, the bigger idea is just trying to drill down more on this idea of authenticity and essentialism, really understand how these different pieces fit together. I mean, there seems to be kind of a lot of convergence about over a topic, and the effects seem similar in ways, but, as we've been talking, there seem to be some important differences too, so really trying to understand the nuances, that are both linking these different domains, but then also maybe differentiating them is another goal.
Okay, George Newman, thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, see ya.